And that's just one element. The reason the gut microbiome is so fascinating is because the gut has as many neurons as the spine. And, you think of the spinal cord and the brain, you think, well, that's the superior part of our anatomy, the brain and spinal cord. But yeah, our gut's got as many neurons as the spine.
Welcome back to this episode of Growth Island. Today I have an amazing guest on. And I know I say I always have amazing guests, but this is a very special guest. I got Caroline Lefon. She has a PhD. She has more than 20 million downloads on her podcast. Let me just repeat that again. 20 million. We're only 5 million people living in Denmark. So that would be like 4 times the Danish population that listens to a podcast. She's a best-selling author. She has a new book called Cleaning Up Your Mental Mess, but she knows a lot more than just about mental health. She also been writing about how you learn new things. She has academic articles on that as well, something that that I'm extremely curious about. I just talked to her before getting on the show. She's such a warm, wonderful person. She's even been to Denmark and many other places. And I could continue on for a long time, a lot of her credentials about all of the fancy shows she's been on and so on. But basically, you want to find her book, you want to find her podcast, and then you really want to slow down and listen to this episode. So Caroline, thank you so much for coming on.
Thank you so much, Messi. It's just wonderful to meet you. And thank you for that lovely introduction. I really appreciate it. Really great to be talking to you.
So Caroline, how did you end up being a leading expert on mental health and also on how you learn new things?
It wasn't that I intended starting out like that, but it was just a fascination from very young with the mind and the brain. And so I actually got into medicine and then decided I needed to move over to another degree, which enabled me to study more of the philosophy of mind. And so I did a combination degree with some medical stuff. And I just went into more and more research and ended up getting a PhD in the field and did a lot of work in neuroplasticity, which is how the mind can change the brain. I did some of the first work back in the 80s when they still were telling us the brain can't change. And so we used to work with people with traumatic brain injuries.
How was that back in the days? Because I often talk about that exact example on my podcast that we thought that the brain could not change. That was a scientific fact. And anyone that believed otherwise had meditation, they were quacks, they were crazy people and so on. So you've been in that battle back then where people would say like, you're a quack, that's totally wrong, like the brain is fixed, we know that.
Exactly. Well, I was trained in that era. I might have my first degrees in the 80s. And so I've done 4 degrees. And so in that time frame, that was very much the going philosophy. The brain can't change. Whatever damages happen to the brain, that's it. And I remember sitting in one of my lectures one day on neuroscience. So neuroscience wasn't even really a word. It was more neurology that we used then. And they were saying, look, once the brain has been damaged, your traumatic brain injury patient's been damaged, that's it. You just have to teach them to compensate. They'll never restore function. And I remember interrupting the lecture, putting up my hand and saying, but Professor, that doesn't make sense because as humans, we are constantly having new experiences. We grow, we change, and our brain can't do anything when we're dead. But when we're alive, we constantly change our brain. So there must be a separation. Ancient philosophers talk about the separation of mind and brain. And if we can manage our mind, surely we can change our brain. And our brain must be changing because people get better, people get healthier. And I remember that's the summary of the conversation. And we had this long debate. And he actually said to me, that was a ridiculous question. And I've done a TED Talk minute. You can Google my TED Talk, the ridiculous question of neuroplasticity. And so I said, okay, well, give me the worst population. So he said, okay, take traumatic brain injury. There's very little research and we don't believe that the brain can change. And if you can make the change there, then we'll be talking. So I did. I went and worked with people with traumatic brain injury. And I took people that were written off as vegetables by neurologists. I mean, that's how they used to speak. They used to tell a parent, your child is a vegetable, your loved one is a vegetable, their brain is so damaged. And I work with people, I developed a system of stimulating the mind, getting the mind active to them, and forcefully then directing changes in the brain. And in that way, we saw massive social, emotional, cognitive, intellectual, academic changes. And I had patients that went from being literally written off by doctors as vegetables to getting degrees. And not just one, hundreds. And then it expanded from there. I did more research. 38 years later, we reach millions of people. I work personally with thousands for 25 years of my practice. I'm working with people with all kinds of issues. And so in the 80s, when I was working in the story around my professor, that was the late 80s. So it was the first neuroplasticity research. I really had a lot of challenge from a lot of the professions, also being a woman in science. And there were so many factors that they couldn't argue with the research. And then by the mid-90s, we had technology. And by the mid-90s, it was accepted that the brain could change. So now it's just an accepted fact. So I've spent my entire career trying to understand, what is the mind? What is the brain? What are thoughts? What are emotions? Words that we just throw around. What do they mean? Can we define them and can we manage this process? What does that look like? How do we learn and all that kind of stuff?
It is extremely fascinating. I know I'm gonna go like a little bit detour. So I read, what's it called? Uh, Homo sapiens and Homo Deus. And he speaks very much about us almost just being algorithms. And that's more like algorithm or things. And how do you see that? Because we haven't been able to explain the mind, consciousness, and so on, right? There's some in the traditional Western sciences still like, well, there's not such a thing, and so on, and we can do everything down to like just figuring out the algorithm and so on that's running in the body. What's your take on that?
And that's been a going philosophy for about probably close to sort of 80 years now. But parallel to that, there's been 150 years of very good brain science, neuroscientific research, or mind-brain research showing that the mind is not just some ethereal thing, it's a real thing. And as I also mentioned, you can go back to the ancient texts, spiritual and philosophical, and you'll see the concept of duality, and not so much just the separation, because the mind is nothing without the brain. The brain is nothing without the mind. You have to have the two together. But there definitely is a separation, and the separation, the way, and then I'll use this and then bounce back to your question, is that if you think of it, you and I are having a conversation. We are able to go back and forth. We're communicating. We're alive. We're using our minds to have this conversation. But if you and I were dead, we couldn't have this conversation. So the fact that you and I are alive, if I linked us both up to the various different types of brain technology, and I favor T because it's real time what's going on, and it looks at the energy response of the brain, then we would see that the brain's doing stuff. We would see that the body's doing stuff. But if you were dead and we put that technology on, they wouldn't be doing stuff. My point is that our aliveness is encapsulated by our mind. So this thing that the mind is the hard question, or consciousness is the hard question of science, is only hard because of the perspective that has been taken. And the perspective is that we have to be able to see it and touch it and feel it. So here's a model of a brain. I can see the brain. I can see now with technology changes in the brain. So this 20, 40, 60 years of our understanding since the 90s or mid-90s of being able to see inside the brain, we've become neurocentric. And that is that, well, if I can't see it, touch it, feel it, well, then it doesn't exist. So the philosophy shifted from, well, now we can see the brain. We see the brain's doing stuff, but that we saying that they're saying that the brain produces the mind, and that therefore free will is an illusion and we are an algorithm run by our DNA. But the problem is that the brain and our DNA, neither of those, our genes on our DNA, are not self-emergent. And that means that they can't switch themselves on. Like your computer can't switch itself on. You as a human have to charge your computer, switch it on, and work your computer. The brain is the same. It's way more sophisticated than a computer. And we're going to battle to make AI that even comes remotely close to the brain because of the mind. So the brain has to be activated. So the mind isn't that. I don't think it's a hard question of science, because the mere fact that you and I are able to discuss this is evidence of mind. The mere fact that you are different to me is evidence of mind. The mere fact that you can think and feel and make choices in response to what I'm saying and come up with brilliant questions and do what you do is evidence of mind. Every second that you and I are speaking, because of our mind, our ability to think and feel and choose, that is generating energy through the brain and the body. Because of that, we can make 810,000 cells every second. So I can give so many more examples. But if you're dead, you're not making cells. Your brain's doing nothing. There's no neuroplastic changes. So mind is not that difficult to understand. We just have to look at humans and what we do and what choices, politics and life and COVID and our responses. That's all evidence of people thinking, feeling, and choosing. That's evidence of mind. Does that make sense?
Yeah. So I love hearing opposing views, and I was very curious when I read the book. I still believe that, like you're saying, like there is something in the mind, whether you call it the mind, the soul, the energy, or something else, that's some kind of personal choice or something else that might not just be an algorithm, right? And as you're saying, like the proof that, it's hard to say that there's no mind because something is going on. And then there's the whole microbiome coming into the picture now that we're starting to figure out.
Yeah.
Where you also wrote a book about what to eat to be the best, right? Where we're starting to understand more and more. I'm guessing when you wrote that book, it was still at the newer days, but we understood certain food were having an impact on us. But now we're understanding even more that like how much is coming from our gut microbiome, right?
And that's just one element. The reason the gut microbiome is so fascinating is because the gut has as many neurons as the spine. And, you think of the spinal cord and the brain, you think, well, that's the superior part of our anatomy, the brain and spinal cord. But yeah, our gut's got as many neurons as the spine. And it's made of the same brain. It's got the same brain tissue inside of it. So there's a very direct link. That's why people often will experience gut issues as a first response to any kind of traumatic stress or any kind of level of stress, because of that very direct connection. But your brain is connected to every single part of your body, and your mind's driving the whole show. So our whole body, I mean, this is an amazing fact. You may or may not know this, but it just goes to the mind-brain concept. We mind, we brain, and we body. So I've got a brain and I live in a body. Okay, so the mind is driving that whole process. Our brain and body collectively are made of about 37 to 100 trillion cells. And as you and I are talking now, not only, and the listeners and viewers, not only are you building this content, growing this content into the physical brain as a structure that looks like a tree, which is a thought, and you're doing it at 400 billion actions per second, but you also creating, as that's building, you are taking this information and you are translating that into a change in the DNA of every single cell of the body. That means that there's 37 to 100 trillion representations of this conversation in your brain and your body at this moment. And as we add more information, so we are adding more information to the content of ourselves. I mean, that's how phenomenal this is. So, and it's not a situation of, that's the mind-brain connection in a nutshell. So therefore, and the gut-brain link, it's just very, it's a little bit more direct. Pathways a little bit more indirect. For example, get your other body parts. It's a little bit longer, but there is still that gut. There's still that whole, your mind is all around you and through you. It's a gravitational field. It's when someone dies, that soul, mind, whatever you want, that spirit, it goes where you're not sure where, but I've got a lot of ideas about that. But basically, we weigh less, and suddenly our body can't do anything. So there's something that's driving. There's a force that's driving our brain and our body, and it's a collective force. Our brain and our body are needed to respond to the mind. The mind needs the brain and the body in order to express you, in order to express me, and that process we actually are able to control the way that we use. In obviously certain situations like extreme trauma and things, we can lose a little bit of that in very severe stress. We have a lot of very strong physiological response, so we can lose a little bit of our empowerment or autonomy in certain points, but you can get them back through support and therapy and management and that kind of stuff. That connection is very powerful.
It's extremely fascinating. You wrote a book about how we can take more control over our mind, or also how we can get better. What are some of the concrete things that the listeners would be able to do?
And so I think you're referring to this book, Cleaning Up a Mental Mess.
Yeah.
So this is, I think, my 18th book. So I've written a lot of books about my work over the years. And this one is obviously it's my most recent. And I'm currently writing another one at the moment, Cleaning Up the Children's Mental Mess, so to help parents help children with their mental health. This book is meant to, it's taken the 38 years that I've been in the field doing clinical trials, going into the field, doing a lot of research in the field. So for many years, I don't work in a lab. I don't work in a university. What I chose to do is to go into the field, do a lot of behavioral research in the actual field, working with people and understanding people. And so on the ground, hands-on understanding mind. And so that plus the formal clinical trials and the clinical application, all of that has given a very deep understanding of mind-brain connection and how we can manage that. Now, I haven't created some fancy technique. You can use, there's so many brilliant techniques out there for meditation and breathing and all the different therapies. There's incredible stuff out there. And you can, what I always tell people is you can draw on any of those that work for you. And there's so much available freely through internet and through social media and great therapists and that kind of coaching. But the problem is two problems. And the one problem is that if we don't package those techniques in a system that drives the neuroplasticity of the brain in such a way that you grow these thoughts to become, and you grow them into your brain and you stabilize them and you stabilize the body over a period of time. If you don't wire them in properly into your brain and your body, then they don't move into the level of the non-conscious mind. So a non-conscious mind. So you have a conscious mind and a non-conscious mind. We want things to go into the non-conscious mind in order to change behavior, to drive behavior, to achieve those goals, to get our issues under control, to grow those new habits and things like that. when you talk about a habit, we're talking about taking a new behavior or changing old behavior to a point where it goes into the unconscious mind and it drives what you're doing. And what a lot of people don't do is they don't do that in a very organized system, and they don't do it for enough. So you know what you should be doing, you can do it, but you're not doing it consistently, or doesn't play out when you need it to play out. And you keep starting New Year's resolutions and new diets and new exercise plans and new relationship plans and so on. And we keep on like almost restarting. And that's because we're not packaging these great techniques that facilitate wiring of the new behavior, detoxing and toxic behavior. We don't package it correctly in a way that the mind brain can talk to each other properly and make those changes in the brain and body. And we don't do it for long enough periods of time. So that's where my work is focused on. How can I build a new way of functioning into my brain? How can I learn something new? So I started very much on that angle with for example, my traumatic brain injury patients. I wanted to help them grow their brain, heal the damage. So we worked around areas of importance. So, for example, their academics or their work environment, whatever they had lost the ability to do, we used that as our target and relearned that. So we drew stuff into the brain and I developed a system that helped them to use their mind to learn new stuff, to grow it into the brain, to grow a lot of health into the brain over time. And then when I had patients that were very, those same patients had a lot of emotional trauma from the experience. So then we would work on detoxing, breaking down the toxic thought and growing a healthy replacement thought, where you remember what happened, but this is now dominating versus this. And that also in the system. So in a nutshell, this book takes that system and all those years of experience and simplified down into a process that I developed 38 years ago and that I continue to test. I now call it the neurocycle. And the neurocycle is a system that you can put, as I keep saying, any technique into. So if you like CBT and you like ACT and you like certain types of meditation and certain types of, you can use all of that. You just got to use it in the right way so that you build these into your brain properly and over the correct period of time, or you detox these and build the replacement ones in. So this book teaches you how to do it. I also talk a lot about the current system, which has changed dramatically in the last 40 years in a bad way. Not in it is good and bad. The good is that we're talking about it, which is fantastic. People are much more open to going to therapy and dealing with this stuff. The negative side is that we've medicalized the normal experiences of life. We've pathologized emotions. We've said emotions are illnesses. Emotions are not illnesses. Emotions are responses or warning signals to what we're going through, to adverse circumstances. So there's a bit of an imbalance there. And so the current gold standard is if you feel sad, how long have you felt sad for? So it looks at the symptom, and then it gives you get maybe some CBT if you're lucky and some medication and hanging around a diagnosis. But that model has worked. People are not benefiting from that. It's actually worse. Those medications have been shown they're not healing anything. They take the edge of something for a short period, but their side effects are so bad that if you don't manage them properly, you have a negative effect from that. So that model has not worked. And so what we have to do is bring in a model where we look at the person in context. Who are you? What are you going through? It's normal to be a mess. That's why I call it clinically a mess. All humans are a mess. It's very normal. Our messiness goes up and down. Sometimes it's very messy. It gets very extreme. We go through extreme challenging circumstances and we get to very bad states. Other times it's just sort of the normal up and down messiness of irritations of life and so on. And then we have all the positive side as well. So we need to look at ourselves as humans in life, affected by everything: politics, socioeconomic environment, the lifestyle, the war zones, whatever. We've got to look at who are you and your context and how that's impacting you and your functioning. And that's huge, and that means societal changes and so on. And then we have to look at how the individual to cope with understanding what they're going through and giving them tools to understand how can I recognize that these are responses and how much control do I have. So that's like a big picture. So the system is working with that big picture, but I've whittled it down to a very simple 5-step process called the cycle that is based on all these years of research. And each step is based on how can I drive neuroplastic changes in my brain and my body. Because the DNA is also changing. And how can I make that work for me on a day-to-day basis as well as big illness? So that's a long answer to your question.
Yeah. So what are those 5 steps? What are some very concrete things that people can do?
Okay. So the first thing is you've got to prepare your brain for the 5 steps. So the 5 steps are directed neuroplasticity or mind-driven directed neuroplasticity technique. It's a system, not a technique, a system. And each step is sequential. So you're going to follow. It's basically simple. The simple version is that it's how we take and how we with our mind build information into our brain. What is that process? And how can I take advantage of that process to build new information? Or how can I take advantage of that process to reverse engineer something toxic that I've built into my brain? So this information we're growing into our brain, it's healthy, but maybe you've been abused or you've lost a loved one in a COVID or lost money. That's a toxic experience. And if we keep that in our brain and our brain and our body become vulnerable over time. So we want to deconstruct that. It's happened to you. You can't get away from the fact that someone died through COVID, or you lost your money or whatever, or you've been abused. It's your story, but you don't want it to be controlling. Then it's very strong. It damages your brain and body and your functioning. But if we can weaken it and reconceptualize it, then we can have better health and we get better wisdom and decision making. We can then manage better. So the first thing is to prepare the brain, and preparation is basically getting the neurophysiology right. So if we are in a let's say detoxing a trauma, so let's say detoxing the isolation from COVID, which is a very common problem at the moment, which has caused depression and anxiety and that kind of thing, which are not illnesses, they're responses. So now I want to get rid of this. I recognize from the signals of my life, my emotions, there's a lot of sadness, depression, both or many others. There are behaviors I'm withdrawing, there's body symptoms, gut problems, let's say, and then perspective. My perspective is mindset. This is the fourth signal. I'm looking at life. Life is just so difficult. I hate living, whatever. So that's just a broad overview, 4 categories of signals that we look at in how we're showing up. So this is part of brain preparation. So first of all, we have to stand back and observe, how am I showing up in terms of my emotions, body symptoms, behaviors, and perspective. So that's a mindfulness. And we hear a lot about mindful awareness. That's a mindful awareness and an acknowledgement. As soon as I do that, I actually do something fantastic in the brain level. I bring that toxic experience into consciousness. When I move something from an unconscious mind that's driving me and controlling me, and I bring it to the conscious mind, I can then redesign it, put it back in the unconscious so that it's now healthy, and that drives me instead of that. That's what the neuroscience does. So the first thing is you can't change what you're not aware of. So the part of the brain preparation is this awareness I've described. Then when we become aware of something, this is a horrible experience. So it can make us very anxious. And this is where things like meditation and all the different types of breathing and visualization and all those amazing things. And there's a lot that I teach in my book, in my app, and that kind of thing.
And Caroline, a quick question for that. So the old school of neurotherapy would go a lot into past traumas. How did you feel in your childhood? I've learned that more the CBT and metacognitivity are looking more how am I feeling right now? How am I reacting? And how can I react in a different way or do something? So is this more like the new school of?
Yes, it's combining all of it, because you can't throw the baby out with the bathwater. So what we're doing is the brain preparation brings in the neurophysiological, the awareness, the mindful awareness, and it brings in meditation, that kind of thing, which basically sets up the shift in your neurophysiology. So now you're much more resilient. You activated your natural resilience, because there's a lot of resilience in us, but we've got to activate it. Now we go beyond mindfulness. And when we go beyond mindfulness, this is when we bring in the 5 steps of the neurocycle. So brain preparation is the awareness and the meditation, breathing, etc., because decompression, I call them decompression. So it's mindful awareness, decompression, that prepares the brain and the mind and the body. Now we start the neurocycle. And this is now going beyond those, because if you just stop at that point, it's not going to stabilize. You're going to keep falling back into old patterns. They're not going to be stabilized. CBT, ACT, all those kinds of things, they basically CBT looks at taking, this is a toxic thought. This is not good for me. I'm going to replace it. So I'm just going to train myself to replace it. Now the techniques of CBT are very good, but the philosophy doesn't work, because if you don't take the strength out of this, you can replace it all you want. It's not going to work in the long term. In the long term, you're going to have to keep coming back and working really hard to constantly keep this one down. So we have to do more. We have to take the power out of this. So you can use CBT techniques, but in the right place. The philosophy behind this is you can't just replace it. You have to deconstruct it and then reconstruct it. ACT and therapy, which is also, both of these are brilliant. I'm not knocking either. I'm just saying use them in the right place. And CBT you use in places like step 4 and step 5, but you've got to do the brain treatments, other things first. ACT looks more at saying, okay, let me find the origin of the root and let me now see how I can find a way of dealing with it better. And so there's a bit more thinking as opposed to just replacement. There's more sort of analysis. The psychotherapy looks at spending a lot of time going to the root, which is very good. But if you don't work and you can talk and talk and talk and get so stuck in signals, those 4 signals that I mentioned, that you don't progress forward. So what you want to do is combine all of it. And that's what I've done. So I bring in elements of CBT, ACT, psychotherapy, neuroscience, clinical neuroscience, traditional sort of therapies, Eastern philosophy. I basically blended it into a system, and then you as the person, you choose what within the system, what elements of each of those you want to use. So now we're in the neurocycle. So the neurocycle is now from the awareness and meditation, the brain preparation, we're now going beyond. So now we become very cognitively involved. It's done for limited periods of time. You can't just go on and on and on and on and on. It's 15 to 45 minutes, because if we spend too long, we exhaust the brain. We do all kinds of things that drain the brain. So I always recommend to people allocate a 15 to 45 a period during your day for if you're detoxing or if you're building new habits. Then there is another way of using it as well, but I'll tell you after. So once you understand the neurocycle, the first thing is now I need to gather awareness. So the word gather, step 1 is gather awareness. I've already become aware. I've already meditated and decompressed. Now I'm saying, okay, now go deeper. Now I want you to actually look at these 4 branches of the tree. So imagine these 4 branches. Emotions, I take it off, I put it in a basket. The behaviors, bodily responses, and the perspective. Imagine gathering it into the basket, and imagine every branch, like I've got a hand. Here's a branch, these 5 fingers. So this is the emotion branch. So let's say that you identify sadness. But associated with that are other emotions. So maybe there's depression, anxiety, frustration, irritation. What are the other emotions and why? So once I've gathered them very specifically and I've labeled them, this is the depression branch, this is the gut pain branch, then the next step is, okay, now I've got those. The sequential nature is vital. Your brain works very much there's this sort of little bit of the algorithm. The brain is very algorithmic. To drive neuroplasticity, you have to be very organized. So you have to bring in, so once you've got the gathered the 4 signals, the reflect step is now, what is at the end of each of those branches? What are the details? The why? Why?
So Caroline, you sit and you identify how you're feeling, the different emotions that you have, and then you ask the questions afterwards to be like, okay, why am I feeling this? Why am I thinking this? And so on.
So gather awareness is not just of emotions, it's 4 areas. It's emotions, behaviors, bodily reactions, and then those funnel into perspective. So it's 4 signals. That's how we as humans show up. Every day you show up with your emotions, your behaviors, the way your body's responding, and your perspective. And that's what people are seeing all the time in how you show up in your work, etc., etc. So what we want to do is we want to now very specifically hone in on those 4. We're getting very organized. We're diving deep. So those 4 are the details that you see here, the branches. And then when you reflect, which is the second step, it's focused reflection. I now take each of those. I take the emotion branch, as you said, and I ask why. So I'm looking for the detail. Can you see all the other branches on here? I'm looking for the detail. Why am I feeling this? Why have I got frustration? Why have I got this body reaction? What's the connection? How am I seeing myself? What did I think, feel, and choose? What am I interpreting? So all the branches above the ground and this is what it looks like in your brain, are your interpretation of how you are seeing yourself, which is producing how you show up. So I show up like this. Why? Third step is you now take what you've gathered and what you've reflected on, and you write that down. When you write that down, you bring the 2 sides of it together. You increase intuition, insight. You activate the balance of symmetry between the left and the right side of the brain. You activate blood flow to the front of the brain. You increase decision making. You have this incredible mind-brain-body connection. Your unconscious activates the most phenomenal things. So the third step,
the writing down is important.
That's what I'm saying. It does all this brain stuff.
Does it have to be like with a pen, or can you write it on a computer? Do we know any difference?
You can do both, but I would recommend, if you're dealing with like an issue, use your hands, because the sensory mode is going to be more effective. But I don't want to say to someone in this technological age that you can't do
My handwriting is like a doctor's, and it's
And
painful. But
there you go. So you do what works for you. So that's where so many programs online that you can, write in. I recommend it's a system I've developed called the Metacog. So when you write in the third stage, you should write in a Metacog form if possible. And I teach it on my app. I have an app that teaches this whole system, and I've did videos, and it's in the book and all that kind of thing. It's a way of pouring. The third step is you don't want to be too restricted. You want to just pour your brain on paper. Because as you do that, you pull it out of the unconscious mind, which is the biggest part of you, operates 24/7, which never stops, which drives you, which has your wise mind and your messy mind and so on. You want to get that onto paper. The fourth step, called the recheck, is where you then also writing, but you're sorting out what you've written. And then to reconceptualize, to see it from another angle, this has happened from step 1 to 3. Now, what am I going to do about it? Now, this is where you can bring in ACT, CBT techniques, because now you've done the right. You've brought this into the conscious mind, you've weakened it. As you put the energy is going from there, you're starting to build a new healthy thought that's tiny at this stage, but you're starting to grow something new. You're taking the sting out of this. And then the fifth step is an anchoring step. It is to practice the new little positive thing that you started building, but to keep you from not ruminating, not getting stuck. And so you end your session with that, and then you spend the day, every time you want to go back to the negative, you're going to focus on this, or every time that you want to practice whatever new behavior. Now, what's very important, and massive, have I said it correctly?
Mass,
Sorry, is you want to do this. Sorry about that. You want to do daily over cycles of 21 days for 63 days minimum. Because if you just do this once or twice, you won't detox this. To take the sting out of this and to build a healthier place way of behaving in your brain, which then produces what you're saying what you do, does take cycles of 60 days. It doesn't take 21 like popular myth. 20, I've done a lot of research. There's a lot of images here where I'll show you that neuroplastic changes, you get a gamma peak at day 21. And what that means is that it takes around about 21 days of 15 to 45 minute sessions of using the neurocycles. You go through the 5 steps every day. The preparation phase of awareness and depression, the 5 steps, very religiously every day for 15 to 45 minutes. I'm writing all the different things I've said. After 21 days, we are going to weaken this tremendously. Shrunk it, it's very small. It happened to you, so it never goes away. Your story is always there, but now I have a replacement thought that's starting to grow. At 21 days, however, it's only around about this big. It's not very big. It's not strong enough yet. So it's got to compete with all the other trillions of thoughts in your brain. So what you want to do is you want to keep going. By day 42, it's like this. By day 63, and I've got another plant over here, it starts looking like this. So you see I'm adding more and more. This means I've grown it. So from day 20 to 63, you only spend 5 minutes a day. Or 3 minutes a day. Going through the same 5 steps, but it's slightly different. And that stabilizes, that creates the neural changes in the brain networks and the body, and creates a very strong mind-brain-body link for you to now show up differently. So when you're in that situation, triggered, this is what you're going to pull from, not this. And take 21 days. So that's if you're trying to build your brain, learn something new. So that's if you want to grow something new that's all positive, or if you want to detox. But let's say that you are now, how does this 5-step process, how can you use this on the day-to-day basis? So let's say that you're just about to interview me. I'm just going to...
And what about the last steps? So that was 3 steps, right?
I said 5 already. So the first one is gather awareness. The second one was reflect. The third one was write. The fourth one was also writing. The third writing step is where you pull your thoughts on paper to pull all the stuff from the unconscious out. You don't even think of it. You are thinking consciously, but you allow your unconscious to drive. So it's almost like an unconscious process, pouring on paper. Then the fourth step is also writing, but you're rechecking. So you're looking at what you've written and you're organizing it. You're looking for triggers and patterns. You're reconceptualizing, etc., etc. The fifth step is active reach, which is a little action that you do during the course of the day, like visualization or a positive affirmation or a little action, your white rose, and it grows out of the fourth step. And it's something that keeps you anchored in the day from going back and ruminating and getting stuck in overthinking and that kind of stuff, because that's very destructive. What we do the work, then we go into the day and we never stop thinking about how bad, and we get stuck in our feelings, and emotions, because those tend to dominate. And then that actually messes up all the work that you've just done, and then you're back to square one tomorrow, and people get stuck. So the emphasis currently at the moment to vent, get your feelings out. Sounds great, because if you suppress, it's not good either. But you can't just get your feelings out. You've got to also get your thoughts, think, how you choose. You've got to do it very organized. You've got to package that. You've got to limit. That's what the neurocycle is doing. It's helping bring all those elements into play.
I also learned that once we label our feelings, they actually become less intense, especially negative feelings. So once we become aware, like I'm feeling sad,
Yes.
and you label it and say I'm feeling sad, then you feel less sad.
Exactly. And that's what you do in step 2. You're actually labeling it.
Yeah.
You're giving it a name. You're being very specific. You identifying. So that's what all these elements of all the years of different types of therapies are brought into this process, but in an order that tracks how the brain builds thoughts, how the mind builds thoughts into the brain.
Yeah.
When you're detoxing, what's interesting is that the root system of any tree, we all know there's a root system here. The root is the origin story. So when you're using this 5 steps to deconstruct, what you do is you go from the signals to the labeling of the emotions and the why and all that stuff, takes you down to, oh, that's the reason why. It tells you the why behind how you're showing up. So as soon as you find this whole thing becomes weakened. Think of pulling a weed out of the garden. The neurocycle, when you use it to detox trauma or bad habits and things, is you've got to pull the whole weed out the garden. You can't just chop the head of the weed off. You'll keep growing back. So if you just meditate, just do CBT techniques, you're just chopping the head of the weed off. If you just do positive affirmation, you have to first deconstruct, weaken. So you have to embrace, you have to process, and you have to reconceptualize. That's 5 steps of healing.
What are you thinking about? So Tony Robbins, he speaks a lot about that you have these old memories. And I know psychologists speak about as well. If you go back, or at least CBT, and just keep remembering the memory, where it's kind of like your trauma, your negative feelings, you create a highway in the brain of like constantly thinking about it. Tony Robbins then talks about how to take those memories and kind of scratch them off, so that you look at them and you do different things with the memory. So it's not just like this highway into the pain of your old memory. What do you think about that? Or is that also part of what you're doing when you're trying to take out the roots?
Yeah, that's what you're doing with the neurocycles. This whole system is described. They're just using metaphors, highways in the brain. So essentially what happens is that highway in the brain is what this looks like. So when you have a bad experience, the experience as it happens is the root system. Then you process that and you interpret that. That's what this part is. And this whole thing is then how you show up. Let's say you were raped or abused as a child, and then there's the abuse, there's the processing, that's how you see yourself. This is how you show up. So, and now the more that you don't deal with this, and the more it happens when you think about it, and whatever you think about the most will grow. That's the highway concept that a lot of people talk about, not just Tony Robbins, but a lot of people talk about that. That's just this getting stronger and stronger and stronger, and more energy. So what we want to do is remove the strength. This is made of proteins and chemicals and quantum vibrations. We want to take that energy away, but you can't just take it away by replacing it with a positive thought or an affirmation. That doesn't work. It works for a short time, but it's a band-aid on the wound. It's a plaster on the wound. What we have to do, we can't just, if you stand on a nail and it goes in your foot, it causes pain. But you can't just deal with the pain and take, here's a medication for the pain. You have to remove the nail. That's the logic here. So what Tony Robbins and them are all saying is we're all saying the same thing, but I just put this into a very organized mind-brain process. It's not just taking elements.
I was just trying to understand how to relate it, and if it was some of the same, like he doesn't only say like think positive, he's very much like, he talks about how you look at the situation and how you scratch it with different sounds or different things, so that you kind of ruin the memory, or like it's not as painful because you see it in different situations, right?
Well, he's totally correct. What he's doing there is he's making you go through, basically, without the steps, knowing this awareness. When you get to the point where you write it down, when you get to the recheck, all those things, finding antidotes, taking the pain away, all those are little techniques you can add for, and it's fine. But the process is, the whole idea is you want to weaken this, and it's not going to happen in one day. It's going to take cycles of 63 days minimum. So I've had some patients who've been through severe trauma who've had taken 2 years. So that's 10 cycles of 63 days. The point is that we've got to go in the right mind-brain order, and we've got to go for long enough time. When we do that, that's how we scratch out the memories, weaken the highway, whatever metaphor you want to use. That's how it basically works.
Yeah. Time is running, Caroline. So one thing to ask you, there's two things where people can find more about you. But first, if you had to give 1 to 3 advice for the listeners about how to live a happy, healthy, and meaningful life, and really shorten down, what would that be?
What I would say is that we've described a long process. Well, I've described a long process of what I call mind management. So you're managing your mind to change your brain and your body. And I've spoken more specifically about sort of traumas. But you can also manage your mind all day long because you can go 3 weeks without food, 3 days without water, 3 minutes without oxygen, but you cannot even go 3 seconds without your mind working. So your mind drives everything about your brain and your body and your life. So the first main point is to recognize mind never stops, even when you sleep. So therefore, you need to manage your mind, and research shows we can do that every 10 seconds. So mind management is absolutely key. And mind management is basically being very aware of how you are thinking, feeling, and choosing, because that's what mind is. Mind is how you think, feel, and choose. And so it's being very aware of how you think, feel, and choose. What, as to use sort of Tony Robbins' language, because you called him up, is what are those memories that are blocking you? What are those highways? What are those super highways that have caught you? Or the blocks in the highway, that kind of thing. Is being aware of how you're functioning in the moment. What are you saying? How am I saying it? What's the impact on me? What's the impact on others? How can I change that? So you can literally use the 5 of mind management, the neurocycle, in a short period of time as well to manage the day to day. And then you could obviously dedicate a fixed amount of time each day to work on the big stuff. So break it into 2. Mind manage every 10. I'm not saying go look at your watch every 10 seconds. I'm saying just be aware that you can manage your mind. You can stand back and observe yourself. Use the 5 steps. What am I thinking? How am I reacting? You don't have to always write it down. You can visualize for that right step, the 3rd and 4th step which you're writing. What's a better way of functioning? And then do it. So you can get yourself under control and mind management day long. You can dedicate a fixed amount of time every day, 15 to 20 minutes, over cycles of 63 days to deal with big stuff. And then the other thing I would say is that you can't control the events and circumstances of life, but you can control your reactions. You can learn to control. I should say you can learn to control and activate your resilience. So those are, I mean, there's so much more, but those are basic. Mind management.
Fantastic. Caroline, where is it best for people to look for you? I will put all the links in the show notes, but where would you recommend people to look you up first?
Probably Instagram, because social media, because you go to social media, my social media handles Dr. Caroline Lee. And from there, you can get to my webpage, which is dr.com, or my podcast is Cleaning Up Your Mental Mess. My app is called Neurocycle. It's available on iTunes and Google Play. The book's available where books are sold, and I've got a store online as well. So probably start with Instagram and follow me there, and from there you can get to everywhere.
And you will be in good company with more than 600 and something thousand people follow you on Instagram already. So that's definitely a recommendation to go check out. Both check out the podcast, the book, and the Instagram account. You are in good company. Caroline, thank you so much for coming on the show. I really appreciate it.
My pleasure. Thank you so much for your great questions and giving me so much time to share.